Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined remotely by Jim Orr. Welcome back, Jim. How are you?
Good, Paul. Thanks.
It's great to have you back on. It's unfortunate that you can't visit us in the studio, but I'm interested to hear your views, Jim, because over the last few weeks, you and I have been fencing around the subject of Neil Lennon and if change is required. And then obviously, we've had another shocker last night. So I would be interested to hear, have your views changed at all on the managerial situation?
I think what I've always said, and you asked me on about 5 or 6 weeks ago to the podcast, that I thought we should stick. And the reasons I thought we should stick was not because I think he's a particularly good manager, not because I think we've done well in Europe, because we haven't, not because they've played particularly well, because we haven't. But the big thing this year, as I keep harping on about, is the 10. So the 10 is the most important thing. And up to a few weeks ago, we were within 3 points. In theory, we've only dropped 3 more points than the world beaters across the city there. So as long as it was within 3 points, the 10 was still on, as far as I was concerned. We then dropped points at Aberdeen, and you're thinking, no more points, that's it. If we drop any 1 point, we're in big trouble. And you asked me last week to pick a team for the Hibs game. And I spent about 10 minutes going through the whole team and my logic and my rationale behind that team. And when I saw the team about 2 o'clock on Twitter on Saturday, I was stunned. Not that I expected the team to be what I was hoping to pick, but it was just an incredibly poor team. And I felt at that point, if we drop points, he has to go. And I said that, I think, last Friday, that you'd mentioned something like, well, we might have this conversation next week. And we said, hopefully not. And I said, well, if he drops points, he has to go. It's all on the manager, basically. I mean, I've heard lots of people talk about he's not the guy we wanted and this shouldn't have happened, etc., etc. And I think, yeah, okay, that's a kind of valid point. We can come back to that at some point, I'm sure. But I think rather than going back to May 2019, when he was given the job, if you go back to July 2020, who wanted Neil Lennon sacked then? Put your hand up, and there'll be very few hands going up, because whether you agree that he should have been the manager or not, he'd done what he was there. He was done what he was brought in to do. He had certain objectives: win the league, did it; win the League Cup, did it; give us a good run in Europe. We've been an astonishing run in Europe. Okay, all kind of ended up not too clever, but we topped the group. We qualified for the knockout stage with games to spare, and we qualified for the semi-final of the Scottish Cup. So if we'd have brought another manager in and he'd have achieved all that, you'd have had to say that's a success.
Yeah.
Whether you like Neil or not, that's a success. So you have to then say what's happened between July and where we are just now. And that's all down to the manager. And you can't blame the board and you can't blame the major shareholder for that in that period. Because what happened in that period? Well, who did we buy? And we spent the guts of £5 million on an international goalkeeper. The guts of £5 million on an international striker. Spent guts of £3 million on the hottest prospect in Scottish football. And then we go to the EPL and we bring in an international centre half with more than 80 caps on big wages. We bring in an international forward and big wages from the EPL as well. And then we go to Serie A, of all places, and we bring in a guy who was considered to be the best left back in the world 2 years ago. And if you can't make a team out of that, forget it. That's it. And if you look at where we are just now, and I'll maybe talk about Hibs last week, because Hibs for me was just that was the final straw.
Yeah.
Because when you asked me the question last week, who do we play tomorrow? And I said, well, let's start from the front. And I say, you have to play 2 up. Now, as I've said in the podcast before, Neil Lennon, John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan will have forgotten 100 times what I know about football. But why can't they see you need to play 2 up front in the SPL?
Yeah.
I mean, you're so much better than every other team. You don't play 2 up front. And the 2 I've said is Lee Griffiths. And I know I'm a big fanboy of Lee Griffiths. And maybe he isn't fit, etc. But you're not telling me you couldn't get 45 minutes out of Lee Griffiths. And you stick him on at the start. And you stick Eddie alongside him, who's just off the back of scoring 2 goals for the French under-21 team. So he's on a high as well. Why did those 2 not play? I really don't understand that. And what I've also said, I think, consistently on the podcast is that even though we haven't played particularly well, if you put 3 points on the board, I think it's hard to criticise the manager because he can't get any more than 3 points. So even if I said you should have played better, you should have played this guy, it doesn't matter. I put 3 points on the board, and that's all that counts. But what I've also said is if you don't put 3 points on the board, I think it's quite valid to question why didn't you do these things? Because to me, they're dead obvious, but maybe that's just me. What do I know? So you say you play Griff and you play Eddie up front, and they turn them and they make chances, and Lee takes great corners and he takes free kicks, as does Eddie. And I said you can't play one up front, because if you play one up front and actually named them, I was quite surprised that they'll get Hanlon and Porteous at the back, and they'll take care of that one player, whoever that one player is.
You said that. You said that before the game, Jim. Yeah, and it's exactly what happened.
So it's not even Edward, not even Griff. It's Ayeti. And you're thinking, what are you doing? And then the post-match comments from the manager was, well, we're great in the last 20 minutes. That's some of the best football we've played all season. And you say, well, who did you play in the last 20 minutes? You played 2 up front, didn't you? And you played Lee and you played Eddie. Why didn't you do that? And then what from back to front? You then say, who's the 3 midfield players you play? I said, it would be great to play Christie and McGregor and Elyounoussi. Christie's a given because he's been the best player this season. McGregor's wasted. We can't keep playing 2 old midfield players in the SPL. I can see it. Why can't the manager see that? So you want Carl McGregor further up the pitch. He's consistent every game. Further up the pitch, he's going to score goals. He's going to make chances. He's going to make things happen. He's wasted as a defensive midfield player. And then Elyounoussi, and again, we've kind of said, he's your 9 out of 10, the next game's a 2 out of 10, 9 and a 2, 9 and a 2. And he scored a hat-trick against Motherwell. So that's a 9. And you're thinking, well, with a lot of averages, the next game's going to be a 2. Maybe we should leave him out. But he scored the hat-trick. How can you leave him out? So we'll play Elyounoussi. But I'll tell you what, see if he gets to half-time and he's not kicked a ball, get him off. You need to hook him. Because you know what? We'll get 5 subs. 5 subs. We don't use the 5 subs usually. What happened last week? Elyounoussi didn't kick his backside all the first half, and he comes out the second half again. Don't understand it. And then see, we play Scott Brown, defensive midfield player. Don't cross the half line. What we need to do is defend. If you've got those 5 guys up front, so the offensive players like Christie, McGregor, Elyounoussi, Eddie and Griff, just give them the ball. And the rest of you, hang back, because we're losing goals all over the place. You then say, okay, we want a back 4 that's going to defend. Who do you put right back? You put El Hamid, because he's a defender. He's got a bit of physicality as well. That's the guy you put there. Who do we put there? Frimpong. Frimpong's had a very poor season, right? Very poor season. What happened last week with the first goal? The penalty kick. Bain saves the penalty kick. Where's Frimpong? Playing at statues at the edge of the box.
I know.
Shocking.
Aye,
the second goal, what happens? Ball comes in, high ball. Who charges? Frimpong standing 2-3 yards away looking at Christie. Christie's looking at Frimpong. Would El Hamid have made a difference? It couldn't have been any worse. Who do you play at centre half? We both said this last week. You need to get Duffy in the team. You need to start playing Duffy. Get his confidence up. Get a settled back 4 and a goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Get Duffy in. Get Duffy in. What did we do? Played Beaton. The Beaton's a midfield player. Beaton's I like Beaton. I think he's a good player, good guy to have. And you put him at centre back. If you're struggling for a centre back, if you've got an injury crisis, you play Beaton at centre back. But you've got an international with 80 caps sitting on the bench. You play Duffy. Why do you play Duffy? Because Hibs up front are quite a big physical team. Put Duffy in the team, let him win his individual battles, his one-on-ones. Who did we play? Beaton. How did Beaton go on last week? First goal, Ayer's got the ball under control and Beaton takes him out. That leads to the penalty. What happens at the penalty? He's virtually standing, holding hands with Frimpong at the edge of the box, playing statues again. What happens in the second goal? Second goal, when the header comes in, just before the header comes in, Beaton standing maybe 2 yards away from Nisbet. And when the header comes in, Nisbet moves that way and Beaton moves this way and creates all this space. And the boys finish really, really well. So would Duffy have been better? It couldn't have been any worse. Then you've got Ayer and Laxalt, which is fine. I said we put Barkas in goals. You said we put Barkas in goals. Because we've spent the guts of £5 million on this guy, and we have to have a settled back 4 plus a goalkeeper, because that's the fundamental, the foundations of any team.
Yeah.
We play Scott Bain, and fair play saved the penalty. But both goals he lost went across him. Barkas is a bigger goalkeeper. Would Barkas have maybe saved them? It couldn't have been any worse. So when I saw the team, I thought, this has got disaster written all over it, and that's how it played out. And you're thinking, if I can see this, why can't they see this? I don't understand. And then that's 5 points, -5. And unlike lots of people, when I've seen things on social media, they're hoping, we didn't manage to get the 1 point. But I think that could be a big point at the end of the day, because that's us now, we've lost 5 more points than the other team. So that's -5. We're on. So if somebody does come in, whoever they comes in, they're kind of on -5. And with the goal difference, that's almost like if we get the 5 back, that won't be good enough. So if we get 6 back, and that's just 2 victories, then we're back in it. So I don't think the league is finished yet, and I think and we can't let the league be finished yet because there's too many games to play. And I think if we get the right manager in, and the thing is, I've got no idea who the right manager is. I think the board, I've got no idea who the right manager is, because I think if they did know, and we spoke last week, and you also mentioned that you've heard that various people have been sounded out. My theory is that I think if that's the case, they don't want it. They don't want to come in, and I think we're kind of stuck with where we are. And it's just an incredible situation to go from where we were in July to where we are now. I just don't understand it. And people have said, and I've heard the podcast, some of the guys have said he should have went after the Ferencváros game. I think that would have been harsh. You said he should have gone after the Aberdeen game. I think that would have been harsh. I don't think it's harsh now. I don't think you can have any defence at all. Neil Lennon is a complete legend, and some of the stuff that's been on social media is unfortunate. He should go with his head held high, because he's not going to change this. It'd be brilliant if he did, don't get me wrong. If he stays on and managed to overturn this -5 and ends up winning the 10, fantastic. I've consistently said also on the podcast, the 10's the biggest thing this year. And people are also saying the 10 is the biggest thing this year. So see if we do suffer hiccups. I'm calling last night a hiccup. If we suffer that stuff, then in the greater scheme of things, if we do the 10, all that stuff won't matter. So I'm not too bothered about last night. We all saw that coming. And as I've said before, I'd have put a bunch of the guys from Norgan in the game. I'd have put it, because again, would have done any worse than last night? I don't think they would have.
That's the point. I think I might have mentioned that last night, that if you did play a weekend squad like you had suggested, would they have done any worse than a 4-1 drubbing against a team who, I'm not saying are a team of part-timers, but some of the players are part-time. Now, I'm going to run through some of the points you've made there, Jim, because I do have a name to throw into the mix, and I'm going to throw that into the mix at some point during the show today.
You're such a tease.
Sorry? It's not that one. Oh, sorry, I thought you said Martinez. It's certainly not that one.
No, you're such a tease. I'm just saying.
Well, I've got a name, so I certainly will be throwing that into the mix. But what I want to do is I want to have a look at the situation like you have done there, and I think that you've thought long and hard about it, Jim. And the one thing about your point of view when you were saying that Neil Lennon's got to stay is that you told us exactly why you felt he had to stay. And I just think that, all these weeks later, you're entitled to change your mind. Now, if it had gone the other way, I'd be sitting here saying I was wrong and Neil Lennon's got to stay. But it just seems to be Groundhog Day, time and time and time again, to the point where people are actually saying that we just need to change the name of the podcast, which we're not going to do just yet. But it is the same old in relation to what we are being served up with. And our narrative is, as I keep saying, influenced by the performances on the pitch. There's a few things I'm unhappy with. And by the way, my view has not changed. I think that Neil Lennon and John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan all need to be relieved of their duties. Neil Lennon is an absolute icon at Celtic Park, both as a player and as a manager. But we're in a situation at the moment, and I was asked about it this morning. I called it the perfect storm. Jim, I think what we've got there is, according to Neil Lennon, after the Ferencváros game, we've got players and influential players who are looking to move and who have wanted to move from Celtic for some time. I think the agitators should have been allowed to move, because what's happened since the transfer window is they've continued, obviously, to create these issues. We've not had a performance out of Edouard over a 90-minute period. We've not had performances out of some of the other players that you would expect to get a performance out of. So they have agitated behind the scenes. I think players have undermined Neil Lennon. I think that El Yunusi, to a lesser degree, Griffiths, because it's December almost and he's still not fit, and Ball and Golly have all undermined Neil Lennon. I think that, we take into account the COVID issue and the injuries, but also the players you've mentioned, and I didn't hear any complaints about them at the time, it have been proven that we've actually had poor recruitment this season. Poor recruitment because when you look at last night's game, £10 million worth of those guys are sitting on the bench in Barkas and Ayeti. Alongside them is Duffy, who I think's cost in the region of 2 to 2.5 as a loan fee. Turnbull's not featured due to COVID, going back to one of the other aspects. And we've only started with 2 of our new signings. Both of them are loan players, Jim. We move on to...
I think you've said there, Paul, that it's poor recruitment. Is it poor recruitment, or is it not about the manager failing to utilise the resources at his disposal?
Potentially.
I think it's more that. And it's also the fact that were they the right players? Well, that's the point you're making. Were they the right players to buy? Because if you're spending the guts of £13 million, and it's not Celtic's money, it's money that we've put in.
Yep.
It's money that the 50-odd thousand season ticket holders at £500, £600 a season ticket, what's that, £30 million-ish? It's our money, and £13 million has been wasted. It's been wasted. And we've had chats before about the fact that, when you say some of these big amounts of money, particularly in EPL, if you say it really quickly, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's £13 million that we've wasted. What could we have got with £13 million? What could we have got with the wages that we're actually paying these guys? But isn't that the issue? That is the issue. We've actually bought really, really well, and they've not been utilised. You said people have undermined the manager. There must be reasons behind why they're undermining the manager, and we don't know that. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and that's why I heard you get very emotional last night about John Kennedy sitting with Snood on. The thing is, I don't know what John Kennedy does, so I find it hard to be too down on John Kennedy or Gavin Strachan without actually knowing what they do, because in any organisation, as you know yourself, people will set objectives at the start of a year, at the start of a season, I suppose, from a football point of view. I don't know what John Kennedy's objectives are. I kind of know what Neil Lennon's objectives are, is to win every competition you're in. And some competitions, the board will be not that fussed if you don't win. If you don't win the League Cup or the Scottish Cup, will the board be that fussed? I don't think so. Not getting to the Champions League and not winning the league are major things. And I think if you're a football manager, if you're a Celtic manager, that's your objectives: win the league and get into the Champions League. But not going into the Champions League, that's a major blot on this year's objectives, I think. Yeah. But I think winning the league and doing the 10 would absolve that. I don't know what John Kennedy's job is. And,
exactly.
And that's perfectly reasonable, because why should I know what John Kennedy's job is? I don't know what Gavin Strachan's job is. Now, if they've been set objectives and they're actually achieving their objectives, I think it's unfair, again, to play devil's advocate, to be too harsh on them. Neil Lennon is the manager, so they must report to Neil Lennon. I mean, this year, as you've said before, we've all become experts in body language. And we think there's some issues between some of the players and the manager. And we've heard some stories that maybe the manager's not been talking to some of the players for a wee while. You look at the body language between the manager and John Kennedy, and you think, is that working? Are they talking? What if they're not? What if they're not getting on? What if, for example, again, just to play devil's advocate, what if John Kennedy's doing a really good job? What if every week he's on the training field, and what if all the players like John Kennedy and respect John Kennedy? And John Kennedy turns to Neil Lennon every week to say, I think we should play the team Jim Orr picked. I think we should play this kind of team. And Neil says, well, I'm the manager. I'm not playing that. I'm playing this team. And then when things go pear-shaped, and the thing is, because we're not in the stadium, we can't see what's happening in the dugout. What's really obvious is when they pan to the dugout after we've scored a goal, they're not jumping about giving each other high fives and cuddling each other.
No.
So when there seems to be something in there, and there's been a couple of times this year where something's went bad, and maybe Neil was thinking of making a substitution, and he turns to John Kennedy and he sits with his arms folded, as if
Shrug of the shoulders.
Shrug his shoulders,
Yeah.
as if to say, for me, again, I'm just making this up for the purpose of discussion. He's maybe saying, "You picked the team, pal.
I know.
You fix it."
Bash on. Yeah.
Maybe if you'd have picked my team, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. None of us do. And I think unless you actually know a bit more, I think it's a bit harsh to be too critical of certain people. You can say, what is this guy doing? Why is he there? That's the question. What is he doing? And is he achieving the things he's meant to do? If he is, I think you would have to absolve him. But everything starts with the manager. And what I've said before, we've got a squad of 28 players. And I think you made the point about having to manage. What was the quote you said about? Is it somebody in the past was having to manage men at 20 and now we're managing young boys at 30 or something like that? You said, was it you said that? Something like that, right? So you've got 28 players, different personalities, have to be managed in a completely different way. You're having to manage 2 assistants. You're having to manage the media. You have to do all this kind of stuff. And he's been left to do that on his own quite a lot. So does he need more help? Possibly. But for me, when he picks teams like he picked last week, you're thinking, I don't think so. I think that's it.
Well, you know what you're saying there about what does John Kennedy do, what does Gavin Strachan do? I think that's the biggest frustration for me currently, and I mentioned it last night, is this disconnect, this discord between Neil Lennon and the rest of his coaching staff there, Jim. What did he do? Well, what I can say is I don't think anybody's seen the appointment of Gavin Strachan coming. I don't think anybody's seen that coming. And I don't think anyone is aware of the fact that perhaps he was this incredibly high-rated coach coming through at Peterborough that, you know, every club in Europe was kind of keeping tabs on. I don't think anyone expected him to be at Celtic. He just appeared. But what I can tell you is that very many other coaches, successful coaches, were interested in that job. And I can tell you that. Now, did Peter Lawwell actually consider them for the appointment, just like when we go back to when Neil Lennon got the job in the shower, and other applications that apparently had been sent in, and I'm not saying physically sent in, I'm pretty sure there's an electronic way that this is done via agents. He's already admitted, Peter Lawwell, that he didn't even look at any of the other candidates. I think
I could talk about this point all day, this one, that I've got no objection with Neil Lennon getting the job, but it's how we get the job. Now, even if you're applying for a job in McDonald's washing dishes, no disrespect to anyone who washes dishes at McDonald's, there'd be an interview process.
Yep.
You know, to be paid, you know, the kind of minimum wage. And we're handing out a contract to someone who's getting, you know, I'm assuming in excess of £1 million a year, without an interview process. I think it was a shocking thing to have done. And if the same thing has been done with Gavin Strachan, that raises lots of questions about the ability of the chief executive to do the job for which he's getting paid in excess of £3 million a year. I'll do it for £3 million a year, not a problem. But there has to be some, you know, ultimately the chief executive is responsible for everything that happens at the club. He hires and he fires. So that's where the accountability lies. He's got responsibility. There's no transparency. And you wouldn't expect transparency because it's a public limited company. They're only going to tell you so many things. So if we've hired the manager in that manner, I think that's shocking. If we've had anyone that way, I think it's shocking. I think if there was a bunch of CVs lying somewhere waiting to be opened and not looked at, I think that's shocking because who knows who's going to be in that drawer. And I think it was a couple of weeks ago, which I found quite interesting because I think, as I said last week, back in 2006, when the team across the city brought in the hottest managerial ticket in Europe, Paul Le Guen, and it lasted a few months. And that's what made me always, you know, think, what's the least risky thing to do? Up until last Friday, I thought the least risky thing to do was to stick. And now I'm saying twist, but I think twist is a hugely risky thing to do.
Oh, it is, no doubt.
Given the past history of who we've appointed. And something happened a couple of weeks ago that got me thinking. Because a guy called Philip Cuckoo, you've heard of him? Yeah. Philip Cuckoo, for anyone tuning in, played for Holland in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. And in the summer of 2018, he went to Fenerbahce as a manager. In the previous 5 seasons, he was a manager at PSV in Holland. And they won the championship 3 times out of 5. Playing total football, cockoo ball, they called it. Sounds like a porn movie. Cocky ball, total football. He's the man you want. Philippe Cocu. He goes to Fenerbahce in 2018. He lasts a few months. A new owner comes in, and he gets sacked after a few months. They're not doing particularly well. Now, at May 19, when we had Showergate, right, Philip Cocu is out of job. If there were a bunch of CVs lying on Peter Lawwell's desk, I would educatedly guess that one of them might be Philip Cocu, right? And if you opened that CV up and you looked at Philip Cocu and you're thinking, in 5 years he wins the league 3 times for PSV, he's playing total football, Cocu ball, you'd be tempted. You'd be tempted to give that guy the gig, wouldn't you? You'd be tempted, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if he did come in, most fans might say, good appointment, well done, Peter Lawwell, good guy, total football, Cocu ball, this is brilliant. He went to Derby 2 weeks after Neil Lennon got the gig.
Mm-hmm.
He gets sacked 2 weeks ago. Last year they finished 10th in the Championship, playing total football. 2 weeks ago, Derby were sitting at the bottom of the Championship, won 1 game in 10. So there's no guarantees, that if we twist, we end up with the right guy.
You're right.
That's my big concern, because there's no guarantees in football.
No, there's
because
not.
This is a monumental season, and because another slip, and I think it's maybe finished.
Mm-hmm.
But 5 points, I think 5 points is doable, but we just need the right person in there. And I think, a lot of people have said on social media today, and there was 1 or 2 journalists posting last night that they think he'll be given to the New Year's game at Ibrox to see what happens next. And I think that's too late. I think they have to make the change now because, as you said, some of the players aren't playing for him. Why that's the case? That's the reason why things have went from July to now, mm-hmm. and all the kind of whatever's happened in that period, we've ended up where we are, and all we're going to do is just drag this thing on, and it has to change.
It does. I mean, I was speaking this morning about that very point you make. I don't think the board will make the change. I think they will give him this run of games leading up to the Rangers game. But I would like them to make the change. I'm definitely not changing my view on that, Jim. And I think going back to the perfect storm, the other part of that, and I'm going to come to Graham Bell's point in just a second, the other part of that is the challenge, because when you look at the form of Rangers, they, as pointed out by yourself a couple of weeks back, are in invincible Celtic form when we won the invincible treble. That's the level that they're at the moment. I'm not saying they're as good. I'm not saying they've got as good players. But if you want to look at an average points per game, they're at that level currently. Now, when you look at Neil Lennon's first full season, after he had the interim position at the end of Tony Mowbray's season in charge, his first full season, we failed to win the league. We started winning leagues under Neil Lennon when obviously there were financial issues and points being deducted. Now, when you look at this season, there's a challenge. When you looked at Neil Lennon's first season, there's a challenge. And I actually think, with all due respect, that that's the only 2 challenges that Neil Lennon has ever faced in terms of a team challenging Celtic for the title. Now, we've had a few tickles from Aberdeen over the years, Jim, but nothing monumental in terms of a title challenge. This season, in Neil Lennon's first season, which obviously he didn't win the league in, are the only 2 times that he's been up against a real title challenge. He showed in the first season that he didn't have it. That was some time ago, and we didn't win the league. I think he's shown at the moment there's managerial deficiencies. Now, who do we replace him with? Yeah, that it's a massive risk, but Peter Lawwell's in a position at Celtic where there comes a point where he needs to take a risk. There needs to be risks taken at that level. Educated, calculated risks, Jim, but risks do have to be taken at that level in any business. That happens from time to time, and this is one of those occasions where the risk has to be taken. So can Neil Lennon's managerial ability deal with a real challenge? Because we've got that this season. We had it in his first season in charge. My answer to that is no. I don't think we change the manager and we're just looking at a manager. What we need is a management team. We need a team who have a proven track record together. So you've got the manager in place. Neil Lennon's not a coach, Jim. You know that. I know. Everybody knows that. He's not the coach. He's the manager. And you need an excellent coach. Neil Lennon doesn't have that at the moment. So there's a mitigating factor thrown right in there. What part did Neil Lennon play in Gavin Strachan coming to the club? Was he Neil Lennon's man? I doubt it. I doubt it massively. Neil Lennon needs his own coach. He's not had that, so it's too late. I'm not saying bring in a new coach and replace Strachan. All three of them need to go. But when we're replacing them, we need to look at a managerial team, not an individual that comes in and John Kennedy's still sitting there on his snood as a number 2 and Gavin Strachan's still there because there's a relationship there with Peter Lawwell that has resulted in him getting the job in the first place. You need to get rid of all three of them and bring in a new managerial team who have a track record, preferably in one of the top leagues. Now, there are plenty, because this is always the next question, who do we get in? There are plenty of managers and managerial teams who are not in work at this moment in time. Now, you might say, well, they can't be good enough because they're not in work. Well, you could start throwing quite a lot of names out, and they become even more tantalising when you realise that they've got a huge amount of experience either at international level or with EPL sides over a number of years. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But Graham Bell has made a point. Welcome to the show, Graham. Hi, boys. We can't continue with the current management team. Brilliant point. I totally agree with you. It's not just Neil Lennon. The change has to happen now, not just to salvage the season, but going forward. Neil has been a magnificent servant, but his time is up. No, he has. He's an icon of the club, Jim. I think there's been a lot of mitigating circumstances around this season. I've called it the perfect storm. Neil Lennon's not the guy to weather it because there's too many issues. There's players not playing for him. The coaching staff isn't working as a unit. So it needs to change across the board there. Can a management team come in and pull back the deficit domestically with the squad they have at their disposal at the moment? I think, yeah, they can. There might be a few tweaks in January. I think if Neil Lennon's still here in January, Celtic will be looking to replace Barkas. It would appear to me that Barkas isn't Lennon's signing. Otherwise, you would be playing a £5 million goalkeeper in one of our biggest occasions, i.e. a European match. It's not happened. Scott Bain, last night I looked at the fact that, the final goal, the fourth goal, we were just adding insult to injury. He told us it was going to happen 5 minutes before, when him and Julien looked at each other on the edge of the box as if they'd never met, never mind play together. Scott Bain is not the man to take us forward as a goalkeeper. And, we've been screaming for Julien to come back. How does Duffy feel on the bench last night, Jim? Julien hasn't played since September. He's had surgery to a back injury. We throw him right in. He's clearly not 100% fit. I mean, by the end of the game, he's getting involved with their forward, Ulish, just like he did with Dykes when he played up against Livingston. He was getting involved in that daft battle. And Ulish obviously was just playing with him. So he wasn't fit to start the game. So what does that say to Duffy? That Neil Lennon won't play Duffy, right? Even though he needs to play a non-defender in his place. And he won't play Duffy even though the guy that's coming back hasn't played in 2 months. So Duffy's sitting there on the bench wondering why on earth he's at Celtic. Barkas is thinking the same. Ayeti's thinking the same. And that's why I question the recruitment. It's not all down to Neil Lennon. Absolutely. You can't be in a situation where you pick the good ones. So I signed Van Dijk, but I didn't sign Bangura. You can't be in that situation. It's a collective. But our recruitment, it's been proven, has been poor. Can a manager come in and utilise them better? I think, yeah, absolutely. And the starting point would be that you start to change the shape of the team. I agree with you. Edouard needs someone up there to partner him. Ayeti is not a lone striker. Why not play the two of them together? The undermining issue, Lee Griffiths has got to take some flack here. And I've been very, very supportive of Lee. But he's still in and out of the team. He wasn't even on the bench last night. Unfit players get injuries, Jim, far more often than fit players. You look at the career right through from the age of 17, to use an example, right up to maybe these last 18 months at the club with Paul McStay. He played every week, season in, season out. You look at the teams built by Alex Ferguson. You might have had a maverick, but if you didn't keep yourself fit, you didn't play. And Brian McClare talks about that. You look at players that absolutely excelled under Alex Ferguson. They played every week. Players like Paul McGrath, absolutely world-class defender. Fergie's not interested. He's not fit. Norman Whiteside, you're not fit. There's too many players on that Celtic side at the moment who are not fit. Lee Griffiths, it's down to the training regime. It's down to the coaching. So that's why the whole setup needs to change. So you get rid of the coaching team, not just Neil Lennon. So I'm being as fair as I can on Lenny. I think what he's done for the club is phenomenal. The guy's a legend. That's not going to change. But I looked at that last night just after 60 minutes. You said there I was getting quite emotional. I felt sorry for him, Jim. I actually felt sorry for Neil Lennon. It doesn't change my view, but I don't think he's been backed up by Kennedy and Strachan. You and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We can only observe what we're seeing at the games. Lenny kicked every ball last night. Kennedy's sitting in the dugout with his snood up, not interested. And I think all three of them need to carry that. They all need to go. And sooner rather than later, I can't imagine a scenario of us going through the next couple of months and keeping the status quo, because we are going to give up the quadruple treble, never mind the league. There is absolutely no guarantee that we're on to a winner in the Scottish Cup.
You don't think Neil Lennon signed backups?
No, I don't. Otherwise, he'd be playing him. He's playing a third choice goalie in Europe. It's absurd.
But I think, if Neil Lennon hasn't signed Barkas, then the issues are much, much deeper than most fans would think.
Lenny wanted Foster. The deal couldn't be done.
Was it not the fact that Foster didn't want to come?
Potentially. But is that because we weren't paying enough money?
I think we'd have found the money in some way, shape or form, because we know the impact that Foster had last year. Foster won games on his own. And I think any goalkeeper is going to pale in comparison to Foster. People don't like Barkas. Why not? Because he's not as good as Foster. Well, nobody's as good as Foster. And then Foster would have been the ideal guy to get back. Absolutely. But I find that astonishing. You said you felt sorry for Neil Lennon. If there's players coming into the club that he's not signing, how can you feel sorry for him? Because that's what he's accepted. I think if you're the manager, then you're the guy that signs the players. You're the guy that identifies them. You're the guy that signs the players. And if you don't want the players, then you don't sign them. Because £13 million is a lot of money. Look at the Sparta team last night. You could have bought the Sparta whole team for £13 million possibly, and paid them half the wages we're paying the guys just now. So we haven't bought particularly well. And if it's not Neil Lennon that's buying the players, then I don't know where we go after that.
We know that happens though, Jim.
Also,
at Celtic.
That I wouldn't overcomplicate things. I would just look at the Hibs game last week on its own as a kind of microcosm of everything that's happening, and pose all the questions that I posed about the Hibs game. And I don't think the answers are forthcoming. And because the answers aren't forthcoming, I think it's time to go. He didn't play Barkas last night, didn't play Duffy last night. He didn't play against Hibs. It's the same argument. I don't understand it. Why would you do that? Why would you make those decisions? I don't know. I don't understand what's happening at all. And because I don't understand it, that's not to say the guy should go, but I just don't see what's happening at all. But I'm stunned that you're saying that you didn't think Neil Lennon signed Barkas, because I thought he signed the players.
Well, there's a suggestion that that's been the case for some time. You look back at the interview given by Brendan Rodgers when we signed Marian Sved, and the comment was, I'm sure it'll be a great signing for the club. He clearly had no part to play. Now that's slightly different. Although we shelled out a fair amount of money on Sved, it does happen at a club like Celtic, whereby players are recruited without the management say so. Now, if you're going to bring in...
Also would have thought this of all seasons.
Mm-hmm.
This of all seasons would be the one that would say to the manager, you get who you need. You get who you need to secure the 10, and we'll back you up. And we'll keep all our good players. And we'll pay big wages, even though there's a pandemic, We'll back you 100%. Who do you want? And I would be really, really stunned if he's ended up with players that he didn't want. And the club deserved to fail if that's what's happened. That's not just the manager. That's other people within the club. The whole thing, if you put the manager in charge, he has to be in total control. And I know the fact that under the previous manager, things had happened that they shouldn't have happened. That's one of the reasons why the guy left.
Mm-hmm.
That's why some of the people see Neil Lennon as somebody who's a bit of a yes man. Well, whatever happens, happens. And if that's the case, I don't think you can have sympathy, because you go in there with your eyes wide open. And if decisions are taken out with your hand that impact on your job, then and you've signed up for that, I don't think you can complain at the end of the day.
Well, I was thinking about this on my way through to speak about the current situation. And it's really a three-pronged situation at the moment, because I think you can give blame to the management team, absolutely, to the playing staff, without a doubt, but also to the highest echelons of the club for the situation that we're currently in. They're not going to sack themselves, the board, are they? So, they look at the players. We can't have an exodus of 6 or 7 players in come January, because that's even worse. So it always comes down to the coaching staff, and they know that when they take the job on, Jim. But yeah, I am of the firm belief that Neil Lennon isn't playing that player because he doesn't fancy him, because he wasn't his choice. He wanted Fraser Forster, but we've spent £5 million on a Greek internationalist, and he's sitting on the bench. We've got a Swiss internationalist who looked absolutely brilliant for his first 4 or 5 games, Jim, and he's on the bench. He doesn't even come on when Klimala comes on, when we need to make the change due to Edouard being injured. And then Big Duffy, who came in to shore up the defence and do all the dirty defensive work, and he's not getting a game, even when we're playing someone out of position last week and someone who's not played for 2 months last night. So that's a massive concern, and that's where the issue is with recruitment. We've brought in 6 players. The 2 guys that played last night are on loan. And by the way, like Saul, I constantly am impressed with his performances. He was one of the better players last night. El Yunusi, you never know. He's very much like Ncham and Rogic in that respect. You never know what you're going to get from him. That's why I would loathe to play all 3 of them in the same team, because if all 3 of them aren't playing well, you've got an issue. But yes, I do still believe that there's plenty of managerial teams out there that we need to start considering, because if we just go for another 8 games, Jim, even though I think the fixture list is going to be kind to us in the next wee run of games, does that then give the board ammunition to say, oh, well, he's weathered the storm?
No, it has to make the change now, basically. It's also, I mean, the supporters have become more and more apathetic, more accepting that that's the season over. Back in the 90s, you would start singing always looking the bright side of life, but I don't think we can do that just now. We get lunched. We have to make changes. We're a big club. We've got a fantastic squad full of international players. And the point you made there, 5 out of the 6 signings we've made, whether it's beyond permanent deals or loans, are international players, experienced international players. And if you can't get a tune out of that, and that's why I do accept how we get the job leaves a bit to be desired. I do understand in the past maybe Peter Lawless bought players instead of the manager. I get all that stuff. I think from July to now, that's the period we're looking at, and I think the manager has been backed. And in my naivety, I thought the manager selected those players. And if he selected those players to supplement what we had last year, obviously Big Fraser's away, that's a disappointment. If you can't get a better tune out of what we're getting, I just don't understand. The performances have been abject, totally abject. There's not been a game, and what I've said in the 5 or 6 weeks I've been on the podcast, even when we're winning, you look at what we could have been doing better. The Aberdeen Cup semi-final, we're atrocious in the second half. The Motherwell game, atrocious in the second half. Now I can see that. You can see that. Most of your viewers tuning in today can see that. So why can't the manager see that? That's the bit I don't get. I mean, you can talk about Lenny's record and where he's had a challenge before and all this kind of stuff. Don't overcomplicate this. This is, for me, it's just dead simple. And last weekend, the Hibs game just summed the whole thing up for me. If you can't see that and it's right before your eyes, you're never going to see it. How are you possibly going to see it? And if it gets to January and he's still there, are you going to trust him with money to go out and buy more players?
Precisely.
You're going to lose players because if what you're saying is correct, or what we hear is correct, there's a number of unhappy players. This will be an exodus. So that's the other point about keeping them. If you're going to keep them, you're going to have an exodus. You get somebody in who can motivate the place and get things going again. Maybe the guys will hang about, because moving in January is never a particularly good thing to do. We're still in the middle of this pandemic. People might be thinking, well, we'll just wait till the summer. We'll hang on. And under a new manager, you may get an extra. They may get back to normal. They may get back to play the way they used to play. If you're saying that, you used the phrase I think last week, you maybe lost the dressing room. And I said, what does that mean? Does that mean there's a few players, 5 or 6 players, that are no longer buying into the manager, and that will just fester into the other players?
Yeah.
And as I said, we don't know what's happening. If that's what's happening, then there's a lot of negativity about. So if you change things, then you actually get rid of negative stuff. And no matter if you brought nobody in, it would become more positive. Bringing in somebody who's really good. You've obviously got this name you're going to tell us, and hopefully they get this guy you think might do it. Who is
Well,
it?
well, I'm not going to say this guy's going to do it. What I'm saying is there are managerial teams out there who currently are unemployed that I believe the team of a manager and a coach is far more important than an individual at the moment. Neil Lennon doesn't have that. He's not got that. He's not going to get it. So if there's going to be a change, it's Lenny, Kennedy and Strachan, and all three of them go. Who do you replace them with? And that's a question I'm throwing out to everybody that's tuning in on Twitter, Facebook and on YouTube, and also to yourself, Jim. So have a wee think about that just whilst I go through some of the messages that are coming in. Paul Cockwell, welcome back, Paul. You're always welcome on the show. That's what Lennon meant with culture change fitness. I must admit, we seem to have an issue with fitness. I mean, to say that he was satisfied for 20 minutes against Hibs. Last night, apparently, he was satisfied with 35 minutes. We really are desperate if we're scratching about for 20 or 35 minutes, Jim. We need a run of performances over 90 minutes, and I'm struggling to actually think of 90 minutes that I've been satisfied with. I've been asking all week, what's the finest 90 minutes we've seen from Celtic this season? It's actually difficult to pick a full game.
That's it. Hamilton
Accies. So you know, no disrespect to Hamilton Accies, but there's a team you would expect to beat. You're playing them at home, and that's the only time for 90 minutes we've actually performed.
Another quick point about last Saturday. Last Friday, you were saying that we're going to Easter Road, that'll be a tough game, and I said it's not a tough game. It's a tougher game. It's a tougher game than say playing Hamilton. Hibs were woeful last Saturday. The first half, that's the worst team we've played in the SPL this year. Hamilton were better than Hibs last Saturday. You couldn't find a player. They offered nothing at all, and we still couldn't score. And then I think at half time, Jack Ross thought they're not that good, and he pushed up another 10 yards. And all of a sudden, we lost 2 goals. That Hibs team weren't a particularly good team, and we ended up scrambling to get a draw. That's another point where I think, yes, it just has to go. Sorry, anyway. No,
not at all. I'm going to run through some of the comments that are coming in, but the team as well. As I say, the team are underperforming, Jim. If a change is made and all of a sudden certain players start performing, then it's a terrible indictment on them as individuals that they're not doing it just now for Celtic or for Neil Lennon and for the fans. But I
also want to say to that point that we've been playing different formations this season. Some of those formations might not suit the players. And I think it's about getting the best out of the players. And you mentioned Shane Duffy before. And Shane Duffy's always played in the back four. So you play him in the back three, he doesn't do too well. Surprise, surprise. Mm-hmm. So why did you buy him to play in the back three? What was the point in doing that? We brought in 6 players, and those 6 players should have been first starters. Maybe Combo, you say, maybe not. Mm-hmm. They should be first starters. And if they're not first starters, there's something fundamentally wrong. Be it the recruitment, as you said, or be it just the manager's ability to actually get these guys into the right shape and the right formation with the right kind of tactics that's going to maximise them. A good manager makes more of the sum of the parts, and that's what's happening across the city.
Yep.
Because I still think, man for man, we've got to get better individual players. You've only got to look at the number of international caps they've got. That's a subjective thing. I think to see we've got the best players. But if you said objectively, let's look at the number of caps the players have got, then I think your guys must have far more caps than they have. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they have, I'm not saying. Hopefully they do have, and not made a mistake there. But he's getting over the other side of the city. He's getting more from the sum of those parts, and we're not. And if we get more from the sum of our parts, we'd win the league. And the big hope is that whoever does come in, if somebody does come in, that's what that person manages to do, get more than the sum of the parts. And if he does that, we'll be fine. And all I'm hoping for the rest of this season is A, we make the change, and B, we make a fight of it. That we don't give up, that we don't, lose in the New Year's Day game and we're, loads of points behind it. We're never going to get back. Let's make the change. Let's get some momentum. Let's get these so-called easier fixtures. Let's get the points on the board. Let's certainly not lose in the New Year's Day game. And let's make a fight of it so that if they did slip and they did maybe drop a couple of points, it becomes interesting. That's what we've got to do. This, of all seasons, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But when I look at the team, Jim, we've got issues with the goalkeeper, but we refuse to play a £5 million goalie. He's sitting on the bench. We've got issues at centre half, but we refuse to play Shane Duffy, 80-odd cap, Republic Island captain, on the bench. We've got issues with the midfield, but we don't change it, and Turnbull's hardly kicked the ball. And we've got issues up front, yet we play one up front and we don't play the £5 million striker. So that would suggest that there are issues in terms of the recruitment, who's selecting the players, who's identifying the players. Michael, the boy, comes in via Twitter to ask, do players actually get scouted live or on videos? Well, Michael, I can only speak to a discussion I had with a Celtic scout who spends his life flying all over the world scouting players. So I think video footage is part of that, but we certainly do go out. There was a policy in place way back in the Fergus McCann era where we had to watch a player at least twice, and there was only one occasion, Jim, where we signed a player under Fergus McCann where we didn't stick to that rule, and that was because he was overruled by Wim Jansen, and that player was Harold Bratback. So that is something that was brought in after the debacle with Rafael Scheidt, the Brazilian who came in for $5 million and barely featured. So yes, we do certainly scout them live, Michael. And as I say, it's just a chance conversation I had with a Celtic scout in relation to that. Now, Regan Stevenson, I think, makes a good point. Pochettino got Spurs to a Champions League final and still got sacked. Celtic need to let Lenny go. There's a huge amount, Jim, of sentimentality around people and figures like Neil Lennon. I can totally understand that. But at this stage of the game, Celtic are more important than any individual. So I totally agree with Regan Stevenson. The question would be, I've seen all the names flying about. But the other day, a name cropped up on the comment section. I didn't get round to clicking on it. But it got me thinking, Jim, who realistically would we appoint should the change happen? And as I say, I'm all about a complete coaching team, not just one individual marrying up with Strachan and Kennedy. I think that's a bad move. I don't think it will take us forward at all. So who have you been interested in when you've seen their names, first and foremost?
I'm struggling. I'm really struggling. I think we need somebody who knows what's at stake at the end of the day. I don't think it's somebody who's going to come in and take a few weeks to bed in. He has to hit the ground running, whatever that's be. I've seen names like Sean Maloney. So I just think everyone's a risk.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
And if you've been paid over £3 million, I think you should have some names set up and kind of good to go. And I think no matter who comes in, I think it'll probably divide the fans anyway, unless you get a Pochettino. It's a bit pie in the sky. You can pick the kind of, what did you call it? Elite managers, right? So
whatever that is.
Whatever that is. The Pochettinos and even Rafa Benitez and all these kind of guys. You want them in long term. I think that's a big decision to make. If you're going for a short term fix to the end of the season to try and get this -5 back, or are we going for somebody that's going to fundamentally change the club going forward? That's a big decision. What would I want to do? I would want somebody who's going to be there for the long term. But you're going to have to pay some decent money. And we've spent a lot of money on that transfer window when talking about all this pandemic. There's no fans at the games, etc., etc. If we do dispose of the current management team, that's going to cost a few bob. And something that occurred to me last night was the fact that I don't think Neil Lennon will walk. Why would he? You know, if that was you or me in that job and you walk away from, I don't know how much Neil Lennon, you would know that because you know this stuff. You know people. But I'd imagine that Neil's on, at least £1 million a year. Would you walk away from that? Of course you would walk away from that. The thing that occurred to me last night is that winning the 10, chances are maybe the manager, maybe the players are on some sort of big bonus by winning the 10. So there's some maybe additional money you'd have to find. So how much money do they have to find to terminate the manager's contract? That's a factor. How much are you going to have to pay to bring in a new manager and all the backroom staff as well? Now, in the past, I think chief executive has been accused of going for the cheap option. I'm just looking at Alec Neil's one. Going for the cheap option, I think he'd be slaughtered if he went for the cheap option. Somebody just posted, David Gall just posted Alex Neil. Won't be a marquee name, let's get real. Yeah, I think that's how most of the fans will feel. That unless we've got a big name coming in, which is a risk as well, fans won't be happy. And I think we're in a kind of really sticky position just now because things have went so pear-shaped in that 4 months. It's just happened all of a sudden. I don't think people could have forecast in July, only 4 months ago, where we are just now. They could have forecast back in May 19 by saying this is not the guy to pick. But in July, we're all hands up. We're never going to sack Neil. Neil's here for the 10. I don't know. I'm waiting for your name. I've been excitedly waiting for your name for the past.
I wouldn't get too excited. What I want to put out there, Jim, is David Gall makes a point. The reason I brought this up is I agree it won't be a marquee name. Now, that's maybe a better term than elite manager, a marquee name. That's maybe a better way to describe the appointment of Brendan Rodgers, who at that point had never won anything other than a championship, I believe, So a marquee name, so someone off profile. Well, I think there is going to be, obviously, some level of profile. It's not going to be an unknown person. It's still an attractive proposition to manage Celtic. Of course it is. But I've seen all the names. I've seen them all. I've seen Eddie Howe and I've seen all the different names. Martin O'Neill, Gordon Strachan, Roy Keane. Alex Neil, I've been informed, is someone who might be on a short list. And I've seen other names being suggested. Would you take, first and foremost, this is where I'm trying to temper it here, Jim. Would you take someone with international managerial experience who's managed more than 500 EPL games? Is that marquee enough, or are there so many of these managers around out of work at the moment that it wouldn't excite the Celtic support? Then you ask yourself, when you look at the manager and the coach as a unit and how they work together as a unit at the top level of one of the elite leagues, as it's known, for over 500 games, could they do a job for Celtic? Because Europe is gone. This is a domestic job now, looking at all the domestic cups, including the league. I'm asking you the question, is that something that's going to excite Celtic fans? Someone with managerial experience at international level?
EPL games?
Yeah.
At what end of the EPL?
Well, at what end did Gordon Strachan manage at the top league in England before we brought Gordon Strachan in? It wasn't at top level, was it? He was hovering around the middle of the table, wasn't he?
Aye.
Yeah, you look at his win percentage prior to joining Celtic, so it's probably between 30 and 45%, something around about that figure. So you're not going to bring someone in who's got a 75% win rate in the English game. That's not going to happen. That's your marquee name. That's your so-called elite manager. Celtic are not going to appoint that man. We tried to do it with Brendan Rodgers and look what happened there. Now, you can't rewrite history. What Brendan gave us for 2 seasons or 2.5 seasons was tremendous. There was a different culture.
My second question is that has this guy had relative success with the club he's with?
No success in terms of trophies.
Sorry, when I say success, in terms of the expectations of that club, has he punched above his weight?
Well, I'm basically just going to throw you a couple of names that popped up on the comments section over the last few days. I didn't get around to looking at them, but since then I've had a look at their names, I've looked at their records. I'm thinking, would that satisfy Celtic supporters? It would be interesting to hear if they would be interested in someone like, let's say, Michael Laudrup. I've seen his name popping up on the comments over the last few days.
No.
Mark Hughes.
Has he not had his time, Mark Hughes? Don't know. If you go for Mark Hughes,
he was employed for 20 years in the top level of English football. He's managed over 500 EPL games, international managerial experience.
I think Mark Hughes and Martin O'Neill, there's not much between the two of them.
So I'm just throwing it out there because I think what we need to do is we need to temper what happens next. Because what happens next might be Alex Neil. What happens next might be someone like Mark Hughes. Would Celtic fans be happy then? Would they be happier at that stage than what they are just now? Do you think a change like that could make any difference?
I think we have to be realistic at the end of the day because we are where we are. It's not as if we can go out and get one of these marquee guys. I don't think a marquee guy is going to come. So we have to get somebody else that the board think can do a job. Doesn't have to be a marquee signing, but there has to be some sort of evidence there that whoever that manager is has got some sort of track record. When you said Mark Hughes, I'm not a big fan of Mark Hughes. I realise, in terms of number of games he's played, he's an experienced manager. I'd say no to them. I don't know who else there is. Who else is on this list of potentials? When you've said, I've seen written somewhere that the board have sounded out a few people, and they've sent DVDs of games in the past season, etc. And nothing seems to have come of that. So does that mean that whoever they've sent this stuff to isn't interested in coming? They don't fancy it. Anyone who takes the job on, fair play to them, because it's a huge job, and they'll be hugely exposed. Then they'll be every single day. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. If you pay me £3 million a year, I'll come up with a few ideas for you. Mark Hughes, Michael Laudrup. What's Michael Laudrup done?
These are people, Jim, who have apparently who have managed in what is known as an elite league. With a wealth of experience, with a profile, and obviously are we aiming higher than that? Are we trying to then say, well, if it's not that level of manager, are we going for someone like Pochettino? I don't think that is realistic. I don't think it's realistic to go for Martinez. I don't think that's realistic.
It was the guy with over 500 games. So guys like Alan Pardew's done over 500 games. Big Sam Allardyce, Ian Holloway, these kind of guys, and they've got probably over 500 games in their locker. They wouldn't excite me either. One would like to think that given the contacts that Celtic have, that they've identified a few people that they think could do as a job. They don't have to be marquee sign. They don't have to. At the end of the day, they don't have to excite the Celtic fans. They have to come in and do a
Precisely.
job. Also, respect to the players as well, because I think we do live in that comment earlier about having to manage young boys at 30. Players are a bit more sensitive, a bit more fragile than they maybe were in the past. We've got a squad of 28 players, loads of international players. So that is a tough job, and I've said that weeks gone by, that having to manage 28 different players, different ages, different outlooks, different nationalities, different cultures, it's quite a tough gig, and that's why whoever we do get in, you have to be confident that they're going to do a reasonable job, and they have to hit the ground running, because we can't drop any more points. And if we bring in somebody just for the 6 months and ends up dropping a few points, he's as well leaving next month. And that's why, you mentioned Mark Hughes. I'm assuming you're saying Mark Hughes is a short-term fix. You're not saying Mark Hughes is long-term.
I think what happens at that stage, Jim, is it depends on how well the season goes. You spoke about when, last season, and I totally agree with what you said at the top of the show about who was complaining about Neil Lennon at the end of last season. No one. So you see where you are at the end of the season, certainly. But the reason I'm saying this is I think we need to temper our expectations to a degree. And if we were to go out and get someone like Mark Hughes, who works alongside a coach, a tried and tested coach who has been by his side at numerous clubs, who is a hugely highly rated coach, throughout football, incidentally, but he's one of these guys, Jim, that does his job. He's not the front of camera guy, and it's Mark Bowen, who was the international teammate of Mark Hughes. So that's a team. That's a managerial team that can they hit the ground running? Would they provide discipline? Well, I've asked John Hartson previously about Mark Hughes, who was his manager for a spell at Wales. Discipline would be number one on the agenda. There would definitely be a discipline. There would definitely be a fitness. There would definitely be shape. Mark Hughes does all what he needs to do, and Mark Bowen does the coaching, and he is a highly, highly rated coach. So at that stage, you then say, could we get them? Well, they're out of work. So the answer to that is, yeah, you could. I'm just saying, in terms of the expectations, the enthusiasm for get rid of Lenny, bring someone else in, we need to know where we're going after that. And this is the kind of person that we would be looking at in terms of someone who's out of work, who has top flight experience. Gordon Strachan came to us having won nothing. Yeah, he got Southampton to FA Cup final. Look at his win percentage rate. He had managed at Coventry and Southampton. Brendan Rodgers, everybody goes on about him managing Liverpool. He had won nothing, at that stage. He'd won nothing as a manager, at the top flight. So I think we just need to actually be realistic about it. And if Neil Lennon's going to go, it's going to be, unless a complete sea change in the attitude of those in charge at Celtic happens, as it did when we went for Brendan, incidentally, I think that is the kind of level of management team that Celtic will be looking at.
Well, when you put it like that, maybe Mark Hughes is not a bad shout after all. It's just what I said before when I was saying maybe we should stick, because if we were twisting blind. We want to change to what? And if we don't know what we're changing to, that's why I was saying in the past, maybe we stick. but the sticking option is now away, and we have to twist. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of expectations. It's assistants as well. You're absolutely right in terms of trying to manage the fans' expectations. And as long as we can maybe show that this is who the new manager is, this is what the manager has done, and the stuff you just said there is quite compelling in terms of if you put it across in that particular manner. My question would be, is it short term? Is it long term? And from what you've said there, when you actually look at the facts of the matter, you think, yeah, he possibly could lot to do a job. As could, as you've said, a number of other people who are doing nothing at the moment. When was Mark Hugh's last job? As a matter of interest?
2018, in Southampton was his last job. I mean, he's had a varied career if you look at it as well, but there are managers along that kind of line of thinking who are currently not employed. Are they looking for something, double the wages of Neil Lennon? I don't think so. You look at his career, you look at what he has achieved in the game, not just as a manager, but as a player, Manchester United, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Chelsea, as a player. I mean, of course, there's a slight affinity with Hughes because he chose Celtic to play when he had a testimonial for Manchester United, you'll remember. But then, a career of around 20 years in management, international level and at the top flight of the English game. So would he hit the ground running? Would he get people excited first and foremost? I don't think that's important anymore, Jim. I'm not interested in would he get people excited. Would he do the job? That's all I'm interested in,
You've convinced me. I think he'd be not a bad shout. After what you just said there. Now that I know a wee bit more about it, yeah, he would not push it. And as you say, there must be other guys like him kicking about. And if we're confident that the guy can do the job, by all means get him in. Because anything's better than what we are just now. But we have to make some sort of fist of this league. Good shout.
No.
Queen 49, I just said, good shout.
What an avatar. Now, Jim, it's always a pleasure, and hopefully sometime soon you can come back to the studio and we'll do it all again. I've enjoyed our fencing kind of acts over the last few weeks, but now you're on board with my way of thinking. It's even better. Thank you, Jim Orr, for joining us once again on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.